I never expected to find myself in a legal battle with our homeowners association. But when Patricia Harrington decided my lakefront property was her personal playground, all hell broke loose. My name is Dominic Walsh, and this is how the Lakeview Shores HOA stole my dock, how I got it back, and how their president ended up behind bars. I bought my dream home on Lake Champlain in Burlington, Vermont 5 years ago. The property wasn't cheap, but it came with 75 feet of private shoreline and a custom-built wooden dock that extended 30 feet into the water. As someone who grew up loving boats and fishing, having my own dock was the main selling point. The first 2 years were perfect. I'd wake up early, grab my fishing rod, and spend quiet mornings on my dock watching the sunrise over the water. Weekends meant taking my Boston whaler out with friends or just sitting with a beer, feet dangling over the edge, enjoying the peace. Everything changed when Patricia Harrington was elected as the new president of our homeowners association. Patricia was in her early 50s with perfectly highlighted blonde hair always pulled back in a tight ponytail, designer sunglasses permanently perched on her head, and a penchant for pastel cardigans tied around her shoulders. She'd moved to our community from Connecticut after her divorce and immediately positioned herself as the neighborhood's self-appointed guardian of property values. The first HOA meeting after her election should have been my warning. Patricia stood at the front of our community center, laser pointer in hand, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation about her vision for Lakeview Shores. "As we all know," she said with a tight smile that never reached her eyes, "waterfront access is our community's most valuable asset. Some residents have private lake access, while others must use our community beach. This creates an inequity I intend to address." At the time, I didn't realize she was looking directly at my property on the slide showing problem areas. I should have paid more attention. A week later, I received my first letter. Official HOA letterhead, Patricia's signature in flowing blue ink at the bottom. "Dear Mr. Walsh, it has come to the board's attention that your dock may not be in compliance with community bylaws regarding waterfront structures. Please provide documentation of approval within 14 days. I called Patricia immediately. "My dock was here when I bought the place," I explained. "The previous owners built it 20 years ago with all proper permits. Rules change, Dominic," she replied coolly. "And as board president, it's my responsibility to ensure compliance." I dug through my closing paperwork and found the permit from the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation that approved the dock's construction. I also located the clause in my deed that specifically mentioned the dock as part of my property. I made copies of everything and hand-delivered them to Patricia's house. She took the envelope without opening it. "I'll review these with the board," she said, already closing her door. 3 days later, I received another letter. This one informed me that the board had reviewed my documentation but found it insufficient as it didn't include specific approval from the HOA, which apparently superseded state permits according to some obscure bylaw they'd dug up. I consulted my real estate attorney, Brenda Bennett, who assured me my dock was perfectly legal. "The HOA can't retroactively enforce rules against structures that predated them," she explained. "Plus, waterfront rights in Vermont are pretty clear if your property touches the water. You have certain riparian rights that can't be easily revoked." Armed with this information, I attended the next HOA meeting. When I raised my concern during the open forum, Patricia cut me off. "The board has already ruled on this matter," she said. "If you wish to appeal, you'll need to submit a formal request with a $500 filing fee." $500 to appeal a decision about my own property?" I asked incredulately. "It's in the bylaws," she replied, tapping a thick binder in front of her. "Page 87, Section 12, Paragraph 4. I looked around the room at my neighbors. Most avoided eye contact, staring at their phones or the floor. Only my next-door neighbor, Michael Chen, gave me a sympathetic nod. That night, Michael stopped by with a 6-pack. "You're not the first," he said as we sat on my disputed dock. "Patricia's been on a power trip since day one. Last year, she tried to force the Johnsons to remove their boathouse because it obstructed community views. They spent thousands fighting her." "What happened?" I asked. "They eventually gave up and sold. The new owners are friends of Patricia's from Connecticut. Magically, the boathouse is no longer an issue." I spent the next few weeks gathering support from other waterfront homeowners. Many were sympathetic but reluctant to get involved. "We're just trying to live quietly," one elderly couple told me. "We can't afford to be on her bad side." Meanwhile, I noticed increased inspections around my property. Patricia and 2 other board members would walk along the community path that ran behind my house, taking photos and making notes. When I confronted them, they claimed they were conducting a shoreline assessment for all lakefront properties. One morning in early June, I woke to the sound of voices on my dock. I threw on a robe and rushed outside to find Patricia standing there with 3 men I didn't recognize. One was measuring the dock while another took photos. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. Patricia turned, unsurprised by my appearance. "Good morning, Dominic. We're conducting an official inspection of your non-compliant structure. You can't just come onto my property without permission," I said, walking down to the dock. "This is trespassing." "Actually," she replied, pulling out a document, "the HOA bylaws give the board right of access to inspect all exterior structures. You signed this acknowledgement when you purchased your home." I grabbed the paper from her hand. Sure enough, there was a clause about inspections, though it mentioned reasonable notice, which I certainly hadn't received. "You should have notified me," I said. "We sent an email yesterday afternoon," she replied. "Not our fault if you don't check your messages." The inspection team finished their work and left, but not before one of them, who I later learned was Patricia's brother-in-law, gave me a smirk. "Nice dock," he said. "For now." I immediately called Brenda, who advised me to install security cameras covering my dock and shoreline. "Document everything," she said, "and send a certified letter to the HOA board formally objecting to their actions." I followed her advice, mounting weatherproof cameras that gave me a clear view of my dock and sending a strongly worded letter to every board member. For a few weeks, things quieted down. I almost believed Patricia had moved on to harassing someone else. Then came the 4th of July weekend. I had planned a small gathering at my place, just friends, for a barbecue and to watch the fireworks over the lake. I'd spent the morning cleaning the dock and setting up chairs when I got a call from my neighbor Michael. "You need to get to the community center now," he said urgently. "They're having an emergency board meeting about your dock." I jumped in my car and drove the quarter-mile to our community center. The parking lot was nearly empty, just Patricia's white Mercedes SUV and a few other cars I recognized as belonging to her loyal board members. I walked in to find them seated around a conference table, mid-vote. "What's going on?" I asked. Patricia looked up, momentarily surprised. "This is a closed board meeting, Dominic. Members are not permitted unless specifically invited." "It's about my property," I countered. "I have a right to be here." One of the board members, Ted Williams, had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Maybe we should let him stay, Patricia. It does concern his dock." Patricia's lips tightened, but she nodded curtly. "Fine, we were just voting on the removal order." "Removal order for what?" "Your dock has been deemed unsafe and non-compliant," she stated. "As per Section 18 of our bylaws, the board can order removal of hazardous structures." "Hazardous? That dock is solid as a rock. I had it professionally inspected last year." "Our inspector found rotting support beams and unsafe railings," she replied, sliding a report across the table. "The vote is 3 in favor, none opposed." I glanced at the report. It was signed by Patricia's brother-in-law, who I now learned was a certified dock inspector from a company I'd never heard of. "This is ridiculous," I said. "You can't just declare my dock unsafe without a legitimate inspection." "We've followed all proper procedures," Patricia said, gathering her papers. You have 72 hours to remove the structure, or the association will remove it at your expense. I left the meeting seething. Back home, I called Brenda again, who promised to file for an emergency injunction first thing Monday morning. But Monday was 3 days away after their 72-hour deadline. That night, I barely slept. I kept checking my security camera feed, half expecting to see Patricia with a chainsaw. By morning, I was exhausted but relieved to see my dock still intact. I spent the day gathering documentation photos, my recent inspection report, statements from neighbors who'd used the dock. I even recorded a video walking the entire structure, showing its solid construction. Sunday morning, I woke early and made coffee. When I looked out my kitchen window toward the lake, I froze. My dock was gone. Completely gone. I ran down to the shoreline in my pajamas. All that remained were the concrete footings where the dock had been anchored to shore. Out in the water, I could see a barge with what looked like wooden planks stacked on it. I grabbed my phone and called 911. "I need to report a theft," I told the dispatcher. "Someone's stolen my entire dock." 20 minutes later, an officer from the Burlington Police Department was taking my statement. He seemed skeptical at first. People don't usually steal entire docks until I showed him my security footage. The cameras had captured everything. At 4:38 a.m., a team of 4 men had arrived by boat. They worked methodically, dismantling my dock section by section, loading the pieces onto their barge. The whole operation took less than 2 hours. "Do you recognize any of these men?" the officer asked. I pointed to one figure clearly visible when he looked up at one point. "That's Patricia Harrington's brother-in-law, the same guy who claimed my dock was unsafe." The officer took notes and copies of my footage. "This is definitely criminal theft," he said. "Even if there's an HOA dispute, they can't just take your property." I called Michael, who arrived minutes after the police left. He stared at the empty space where my dock had been. "This is insane. They've gone too far." "I need to find out where they took it," I said, already changing into clothes. "Can I borrow your boat?" Michael nodded, and 20 minutes later we were cruising along the shoreline. We didn't have to go far. Less than a mile down the lake, we spotted familiar wooden planks being assembled at the community beach area. My dock, or pieces of it, was being reconstructed in a new configuration. I took dozens of photos as we circled offshore. Patricia was there, directing workers as they pieced together my property into what appeared to be a new community dock extending from the HOA's small beach area. "I can't believe they're so brazen," Michael said. "They literally stole your dock and are rebuilding it in plain sight." We returned to my house to find Brenda waiting. I'd called her on the way back, and she'd driven straight over from Montpelier. When I showed her the photos, she was livid. "This goes way beyond an HOA dispute," she said. "This is grand theft, criminal conversion of property, and possibly fraud. We're calling the state authorities." Brenda explained that since this involved a structure on Lake Champlain, which is regulated waterway, we needed to contact the Vermont State Police Marine Division. She made the call, and by afternoon, a patrol boat was investigating the community beach where my former dock was now half-assembled. I watched from Michael's boat as 2 officers documented the scene and spoke with Patricia, who gesticulated wildly and repeatedly pointed toward my property. Eventually, they escorted her to their vessel and headed to the marina. The next morning, I received a call from Detective Samuel Jenkins of the State Police. "Mr. Walsh, we've conducted our initial investigation and have some questions. Can you meet us at the station?" At the station, Detective Jenkins and his partner showed me photographs of my dock in its new location. "Mrs. Harrington claims this dock belongs to the HOA," he said. "She says it was built with community funds 10 years ago and was only temporarily located on your property as part of a loan agreement that expired." I laughed despite myself. "That's absurd. I have the original building permits from 20 years ago. The dock is specifically listed in my property deed." She provided a document showing an HOA vote to repatriate community property signed by all board members, he continued. That document is fraudulent, I replied, pulling out my folder of evidence. Here's my deed, the original permits, my property survey showing the dock, and 5 years of tax assessments where I've been paying property taxes on that dock as part of my real estate. The detectives reviewed my documents carefully. There's one more issue, Detective Jenkins said. The dock has been modified during reconstruction. Mrs. Harrington claims these modifications prove it's not your original dock, but rather a new construction using some recycled materials. I have security footage of them removing my dock piece by piece, I countered. And I can identify several unique features. There's a heart my nephew carved in one plank 3 summers ago, and a special cleat I installed for my boat that has my initials on it. By the end of our meeting, the detectives seemed convinced. We're going to need a few days to complete our investigation, Jenkins said. In the meantime, don't approach Mrs. Harrington or the construction site. The next 3 days were agonizing. I took time off work, unable to concentrate on anything but the theft of my dock. Friends stopped by with food and support, but I couldn't shake my anger. This wasn't just about a wooden structure, it was my property, my lake access, part of what made my home special. On Thursday afternoon, Detective Jenkins called. Mr. Walsh, we've completed our investigation and are preparing to file charges against Patricia Harrington and 3 others for grand theft, criminal conversion of property, filing false documents, and criminal trespass. What happens to my dock? I asked. That's why I'm calling. We've issued an order for them to dismantle the structure at the community beach and return all materials to your property within 48 hours. We'll supervise the process to ensure compliance. Friday morning, I watched from my deck as state police boats arrived at the community beach. Workers, different ones from those who had taken my dock, began carefully disassembling the structure while officers supervised. Patricia was nowhere to be seen. By Saturday evening, a team was at my shoreline, rebuilding my dock according to the original plans I'd provided. The state police had arranged everything, explaining that the cost would be billed to the HOA as part of restitution. Sunday morning, I walked out onto my restored dock for the first time. It wasn't perfect, some planks were scratched or slightly damaged, but it was mine again, extending into the clear waters of Lake Champlain just as it had before. My celebration was interrupted by the arrival of Detective Jenkins in his patrol boat. "Morning, Mr. Walsh," he called as he pulled alongside. "Thought you'd want to know we arrested Patricia Harrington this morning." "On what charges?" "In addition to the theft and property conversion, we discovered she'd been embezzling from the HOA accounts for over a year. Apparently, she paid her brother-in-law's company over $50,000 for inspections and emergency repairs that were never performed." The news spread quickly through our community. By evening, my phone was buzzing with messages from neighbors expressing shock and support. Michael organized an impromptu gathering on my newly restored dock, where longtime residents shared stories of Patricia's reign of terror, from arbitrary fines to personal vendettas against anyone who challenged her authority. 2 days later, I attended an emergency HOA meeting where the remaining board members, looking shell-shocked, announced Patricia's removal as president and the appointment of an interim leader until special elections could be held. Ted Williams, who had always seemed uncomfortable with Patricia's methods, approached me after the meeting. "I owe you an apology, Dominic," he said, extending his hand. "I should have stood up to her sooner. Many of us knew she was going too far, but she was so intimidating. What happens now?" I asked. "The board is cooperating fully with the investigation. We've hired a forensic accountant to go through all our records, and we're reviewing every decision made during Patricia's tenure to identify any other inappropriate actions." The legal proceedings moved surprisingly quickly. Patricia was denied bail due to what the judge called a pattern of deceptive behavior and abuse of authority. Her brother-in-law and the two men who had helped dismantle my dock agreed to testify against her in exchange for reduced charges. 3 months later, I sat in the courtroom as Patricia, dressed in a beige prison jumpsuit instead of her usual pastel cardigan, pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in state prison and ordered her to pay restitution not just to me, but to the HOA and several other homeowners who had been victimized by her schemes. The court takes these crimes particularly seriously, the judge said during sentencing, because they represent not just theft of property, but an abuse of community trust. Homeowners associations exist to maintain communities, not to serve as vehicles for personal vendettas or enrichment. As fall turned to winter, life at Lakeview Shores began to return to normal. The new board, led by Michael Chen, who had been elected president, adopted a series of reforms to increase transparency and limit the power of any single board member. One cold December evening, as snow dusted the shoreline, I sat in my living room looking out at the lake. My dock, now covered with a light blanket of white, extended into the dark water just as it always had. In the spring, I'd need to refinish some planks and replace a few boards, but for now it stood as a testament to standing up for what's right, even when facing seemingly insurmountable odds. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brenda Bennett, my attorney, holding a bottle of champagne. "Thought we should celebrate," she said, stepping inside. "I just heard from the prosecutor. Patricia's appeal was denied. The conviction stands." We opened the champagne and toasted by the fireplace. "You know," Brenda said, "your case has become something of a legend among property attorneys. There's talk of using it to push for state legislation limiting HOA powers." "I never wanted to be a test case," I admitted. "I just wanted my dock back." "Sometimes standing up for yourself creates ripples you never expected," she replied. "Speaking of which, I have news about your restitution. The court has ordered Patricia to pay for a complete replacement of your dock, not just repairs." The judge agreed that the sentimental value and peace of mind were compromised by her actions. I was speechless. The thought of a brand new dock, built to my specifications without the shadow of Patricia's interference, felt like the final chapter in a story I never asked to be part of. The following spring brought renewal to Lakeview Shores in more ways than one. The community, freed from Patricia's tyranny, organized its first ever lakefront festival. Residents opened their properties for a progressive party that wound along the shoreline. Children played on docks, adults shared food and drinks, and neighbors who had barely spoken during Patricia's reign discovered common interests and formed new friendships. My new dock, completed in April, became a gathering spot. Built with sustainable hardwoods and featuring a wider platform at the end with built-in seating, it was better than I could have imagined. I'd had the builders incorporate a small plaque near the entrance. "Justice floats ESD 2025. Michael laughed when he saw it. "Subtle," he said, handing me a beer as we broke in the new structure with a small gathering. "I thought about something more direct," I admitted. "Like Patricia Free Zone, but decided that gave her too much credit." Ted Williams, now serving as community liaison on the new board, joined us with his wife. "Have you heard the latest?" he asked. "Patricia's appealing for early release, claims she's found God and is a changed woman." "The prosecutor says there's no chance," I replied. "Her restitution payments have barely started." As summer progressed, I found myself hosting regular Friday evening gatherings on my dock. Neighbors would stop by with drinks or snacks, and we'd watch the sunset together. Even residents who didn't have lake access felt welcome, a stark contrast to the divisiveness Patricia had cultivated. In August, I received an unexpected letter forwarded by Brenda. The return address showed the Vermont Women's Correctional Facility. Patricia's handwriting was precisely as I remembered from her HOA notices, neat, controlled with flourishes on the capital letters. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I wanted any contact with the woman who had caused so much trouble. Curiosity won out. "Mr. Walsh," the letter began formally, "I am writing to express my sincere apologies for my actions regarding your property and the distress I caused you. Prison has given me time to reflect on my behavior and the harm I've caused to many people in our community." The letter continued for 3 pages, alternating between what seemed like genuine remorse and subtle justifications. "I truly believed I was acting in the community's best interest," she wrote at one point, undermining the apology that had preceded it. I showed the letter to Michael during our next doc gathering. He read it carefully before handing it back. "Do you believe her?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Parts seem sincere, but then she slips back into the same controlling language. I'm not sure people like Patricia ever truly change." "Are you going to respond?" I looked out at the lake, at boats passing by and children swimming near the shore. "No," I said finally. "Some chapters are better left closed." As fall approached, I received word that the Vermont legislature was considering a bill inspired partly by my case. Dubbed the Homeowner Protection Act, it would establish clearer boundaries for HOA authority and create an ombudsman office to mediate disputes before they escalated to the courts. I was invited to testify at a committee hearing in Montpelier, sharing my experience with lawmakers who seemed genuinely concerned about preventing similar abuses of power. Several other homeowners from across the state also spoke, revealing that Patricia's tactics, while extreme, weren't unique. "The problem," I told the committee, "isn't HOAs themselves. When run properly, they can maintain neighborhoods and create community. The problem is when individuals use them as personal fiefdoms without accountability." The bill passed with bipartisan support, giving homeowners new protections while preserving the legitimate functions of community associations. Governor Mitchell signed it into law on a crisp October morning, with several of us who had testified standing behind him for the official photos. Winter came again to Lake Champlain, ice forming along the shoreline and eventually extending out past my dock. I had it properly winterized this time, with advice from several neighbors who had decades of experience with lake structures. On New Year's Eve, I hosted a small gathering at my home. Michael and his wife, Ted and his family, Brenda and her husband, and several other neighbors who had supported me through the dock ordeal. As midnight approached, we bundled up and walked down to the snow-covered dock with champagne and sparklers. "I propose a toast," Michael said as we formed a circle at the end of the dock, our breath visible in the cold air. "To community, real community. Not rules and regulations, but people caring for each other and standing together when it matters." We raised our glasses, the ice beneath us solid and unyielding, the stars bright in the clear winter sky. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected to find after so much conflict. Spring thaw brought new changes to Lakeview shores. The association, now operating under reformed bylaws that limited individual power and required transparency, launched several community improvement projects that had been neglected during Patricia's tenure. One May afternoon, I arrived home to find an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. For a moment, my stomach tightened, a Pavlovian response to HOA communications that hadn't fully faded. Inside, however, was a simple certificate naming me Neighbor of the Year for standing up for property rights and helping to build a stronger, more just community. It was signed by every board member and included an invitation to the summer kickoff party where I would be formally recognized. I was touched by the gesture, unexpected as it was. The party was held at the community beach, the same spot where Patricia had attempted to relocate my stolen dock. Now transformed with new landscaping and legitimate, properly permitted community facilities, it had become a genuine gathering place rather than a battleground. As Michael presented me with the award, I looked out at my neighbors, some I'd known for years, others I'd only met during the aftermath of the dock incident. All were smiling, applauding, part of a community healing after a period of division. "I don't really deserve this," I said when handed the microphone. I was just protecting what was mine. The real heroes are all of you who came together afterward to rebuild not just my dock, but our neighborhood. That evening, as the party wound down, I walked home along the shore path, stopping to look out at my dock extending into the calm water. 2 Adirondack chairs now sat at the end, one for me, one for whoever might join me. A simple change that symbolized everything that had transpired. I sat in one chair, watching the last light fade from the sky, reflecting on the unexpected journey of the past year. A property dispute had turned into a criminal case, which had then catalyzed community renewal and even legislative reform. All because I refused to let someone take what was rightfully mine. My phone buzzed with a text from Brenda. Thought you'd want to know, Patricia's parole was denied. Full sentence to be served. I set the phone down, feeling neither joy nor resentment at the news. Patricia had made her choices and was facing the consequences. Meanwhile, life at Lakeview Shores continued, improved by her absence but no longer defined by her presence. As night fell completely, lights came on along the shoreline, warm glows from the homes of neighbors who had become friends through adversity. Out on the water, a few boats made their way home for the evening, navigation lights reflecting on the surface. I remained on my dock until the stars emerged fully, a sense of ownership that extended beyond legal deeds and property rights filling me with contentment. Some things, once threatened, become more precious. My dock was one of those things, not just wood and nails, but a symbol of standing one's ground against injustice. The lake lapped gently against the pilings, a rhythmic sound that had become the soundtrack of my life here. Whatever challenges might come next, I knew this place, my home, my dock, my community, was worth fighting for, and that knowledge made all the difference.